Hi, everybody. This is Paul Hitchcock. I am the founder and president of Giant Jacks Media, headquartered here in Orange County, California. This is my channel called Giant TV, where I have incredible entrepreneurs on here doing amazing things. And certainly Mark Panciera and Jane-Scott Cantus are two of them. Welcome, both of you.
Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Paul.
Yeah, and I'm gonna do a quick intro here because everyone wants to know who you are. So, Mark, you are the award-winning keynote speaker and former CEO of the Pacific Institute. Jane
hmm
Scott, you and I have gotten to know each other a bit here. You are a collective leadership strategist and Vistage chair. And so I want you to just expand a little bit, Mark, if you could start on what exactly you're doing, your focus.
Surely, surely. Yes, former CEO of the Pacific Institute, now have the title CEO Emeritus. And I'm just out in the field advocating for mental technology, this great information that the Pacific Institute has packaged over the last 50 years of our
Yeah.
existence and sharing it with leaders like the leaders that are listening today.
Excellent. And Jane Scott, you're doing a lot. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your focus?
Okay. So my focus over time has really come into play around collective leadership, that leadership operating as a shared organizational capability rather than a set of disconnected, albeit synchronized roles. If you think about leadership development as an individual, it elevates to the point where you are more being than doing. I
hmm
believe that the leadership collective has that same development arc. So
hmm
that's my focus. I leverage peer forums, both on the Vistage platform as well as those that are created for clients and specific topics, because I don't believe that development can happen in isolation.
hmm
Love it. Well, I want to get in this conversation because as we were prepping for this, I was fascinated by what the focus of this is, which is exploring the connection between individual mindset and collective organizational performance. We got to break that apart, and I've got some some strategic questions I want to get into, and I'm going to start out by asking this, and maybe Jane Scott, you can start. Is uh, your work emphasizes, Mark, how beliefs shape how we interpret reality. Jane Scott, what happens when a leadership team is operating from different interpretations of that same reality? We can start there and then Mark, get over to you.
hmm
Well, so when leadership teams operate from different interpretations of the same reality, organizations begin to fragment. Not because leaders are incapable, but because they're interpreting reality through different assumptions, priorities, or success definitions. Most leadership dysfunction does not initially show up as an open conflict, it shows up as drag. Slower decisions, mixed signals, competing priorities, execution friction, across teams. I call that a coherence gap. And that gap is, between having capable leaders and having a leadership that operates coherently as a system, right? The organization experiences fragmentation instead of momentum.
hmm So
Mark?
trading on
Yeah.
that, I'm going to share the phrase, when you confuse, you lose. And if leadership teams are fragmented, they are confused because they don't all have the same clear vision for the future. And that's what creates blind spots. And we're just all moving in different directions. So often we think that leaders are looking for sophisticated solutions, and we hear most regularly that they just want to get their teams rowing in the same direction. We got to be clear of that direction. We got to make sure everybody knows what the North Star is. And where we start in support of Jane Scott's work is that we start with the individual because we believe that all meaningful and lasting change starts from within the individual and then cascades on to others. And as leaders, we need to really look ourselves in the mirror and be self-introspective, if you will, in order to recast our own mindset. And at the Pacific Institute, we believe mindset is the collection of our, here's the acronym, HABES, habits, attitudes, beliefs, and expectations. And once we understand our own limiting beliefs, we can recast our mindset, really hack our mind, move from limiting beliefs to liberating ones, and then illuminate the potential of others. And that's our job as leaders, to be real navigators for others' potential in order to drive that alignment, that coherence that Jane Scott is speaking of.
I got a question there. So you're talking about disjointed teams here. and then, getting everyone to be on the same page and coherence. If it starts with the leader, is what I'm assuming here, laying out that path. What if the leader doesn't have those innate qualities as a
Mm,
human being, right?
mhm.
Is it a breakdown of communication? Like, how do you teach somebody to be a better leader when the team's breaking apart?
Mm.
Hmm. I
Jane
would,
James,
Scott, you go. Yeah.
yeah, I'd slant that a little bit and say that the team is breaking apart because the leader is operating at a lower level of competence than that leader needs to be at, right? I think the cause and effect really is on the leadership. Individual change is where performance begins, right? Leadership
mhm,
growth, self-awareness, mindset development are foundational.
mhm,
But organizations don't ultimately perform as isolated individuals, they perform as leadership systems. So the initial leader, if you will, and the reason I'm hesitating on that is that it does not come down to a single leader when you actually are moving towards a leadership collective, right? It's actually a system of leaders. There may be
mhm,
somebody with the title CEO, but really it's leaders who have shared beliefs, shared behaviors, shared vision, right? So while it may start with the initial leader, the CEO, or whoever is fostering the development of a collective leadership, ultimately it does not become reliant on just that one CEO.
Mm,
That basically is synchronization, right? People are
mhm.
doing
yeah.
what they're supposed to be doing. They're competent in hitting their KPIs, which, by the way, should be a basic minimum of what you expect from your teams. But if everybody knows their roles and they understand how they play into each other, then that's synchronization. That's the next level of development. The top level is when the leadership team comes through that collective coherence and everybody is sharing not just actions, they're sharing how it thinks, decides, communicates, and operates together. It is no longer dependent on just one leader.
Mhm. And trading on that, I want to emphasize what Jane Scott mentioned about, and here's the drop the mic moment, Paul.
Mhm.
It's beliefs that drive behaviors, that drive performance. And so often leaders get stuck in this whole notion that, we got to change the behaviors of our teams in order to drive great breakthrough performance. Well, leaders, and to your question, leaders need to be self-aware. And how we
Uh-huh.
do that is create a self-awareness moment, that aha moment saying, whoa, I might be missing something here. And it might not be me missing something. I may just not be communicating what I see clearly. And then it's me affecting the team in a non-coherent way, if you
Yeah.
will. But we got to make sure that at the leadership level, there first is that awareness moment to drive an acceptance of, okay, this is what might be holding us back, a limiting belief. And what do I have to do as a leader to positively impact the beliefs of others to drive greater collective or coherently aligned behavior to drive greater performance for the team? And then also to conclude, trading on what Jane Scott shared, there needs to be a collective, and because it's a guiding coalition that then creates the culture that is that Elmer's glue. What's it? It comes out of the bottle or jar, white, you can see it, but then it dries clearly, and everybody just rows in the same direction because that's the new organizational culture, and it's no longer up to just that one leader. Everybody becomes a leader, proverbially rowing in the same direction.
How do you handle that when you're when you're getting there and actually working with the teams and the leader? Each of you is, you said, Mark, well, the leader needs to become self-aware. How do you have that discussion with a leader? Is it a one-on-one thing? Are you meeting with the leader and the team? Like, how do you flesh that out that the leader is not
Sure.
self-aware?
Sure. Well, it's interesting, and Jane Scott, I'll reply based on Paul directing the question to me. Jane
Mhm.
Scott experienced how I opened my presentation to her Vistage group, and that is with a scotoma exercise. The word scotoma in Greek means blindness or blind spot, something that's missing in plain sight. It's right in front of us, and we just can't see it. So it's a bit of an interesting, intriguing exercise, but everybody in the room ends up, I'll just say, getting different answers to a somewhat simple question. And when other leaders, no matter if you get the right answer or the wrong answer, when everybody sees that everybody is seeing something differently, there's that awareness moment saying, whoa, what might I be missing? And I had that same experience in my career 20 years ago when I had that awareness moment saying, whoa, and I thought I had all the right answers. I was a pretty successful business guy back then, but I was on the wrong side of ego and a bit arrogant, realizing that, man, I thought I had all the right answers, but man, was I missing things. And it was that through that self-awareness that you become more of a servant leader and not only illuminate your own blind spots, but then help others illuminate theirs as well. Jane-Scott?
Yeah. Yeah. Organizations can develop shared blind spots just like individuals do, right? And in fact, they're often harder to detect because they become socially reinforced assumptions, right? The organization stops questioning them because that's just how we think we are. That's how we think here. One client I worked with actually, it's a great example,
Yeah.
had a failed acquisition years earlier, like decades earlier. Over time, the organization internalized the belief we're not good at acquisitions. We can't grow. We have to
Uh,
only grow organically. And that belief became embedded in leadership thinking and reinforced by the leaders who lacked acquisition experience themselves. The issue was not simply capability, it was a collective interpretation, right? That's how it becomes an organizational blind spot. What we were able to do is we eventually introduced both acquisition expertise and a different leadership mindset into the system. And to introduce a leadership mindset into the system, you have to recognize where each individual is, but you also have to recognize the trust that they have amongst each other, right? And the real transformation occurred when that mindset became integrated into the leadership collective itself. Over time, the organization developed an increasing collective coherence around growth, risk, integration strategy. Took them 10 years. They were doing increasingly larger acquisitions, and then the company completed a transformational acquisition that more than doubled its size and contributed to a highly successful exit. Almost all of their growth in the last 10 years was through acquisition, which they said they weren't good at doing, right?
Mm,
It's a blind
man.
spot. You challenge it, you call it out. Again, this is why it can't be done in isolation. Adam Grant has a great quote. It takes curiosity to learn, but it takes courage to unlearn. And that's what you're
Hmm.
asking individuals to do themselves, where are they having their own self-limiting beliefs, and where, when they come together as a group, they have maybe sometimes the same, but certainly augmented what's the belief of what the group is able to achieve. What's
Mm,
the group limiting beliefs that they need to
mm,
challenge?
hmm. Amen to that.
Mhm.
Mark, you're contemplating something
I am. I'm
there.
thinking of a Mark Twain quote, and I want to get it right. Mark Twain, one of his famous quotes, and he's got so many of them. It's not about what you think you know.
Mhm.
It's about what you think you know when you don't. I just killed it. If I'm going to go
No, I
offline
know,
over
I
here
know. I
and
know the quote.
Okay.
I know the quote.
I mean, we should find it because it is just perfect. And it's what Jane-Scott just said. And it's not when you think you know, it's when you think you know when you really don't. But he was more prolific and more profound than I just was. But it's that because so often we as leaders are stuck in that negative goal setting of no, we can't do it through acquisition, and we're just telling ourselves that, and we're just so blind to the opportunity, and it just shuts down innovation, shuts down possibility thinking, and then it cascades through the organization because we're creating that lack of coherence. We're not having everybody proverbially roll in the same direction because of what we believe we know, and it's just a
Mhm.
falsehood. So once again, it's never about getting the right answer. It's about building coherence around a collective vision of where everybody is bought into and owns the outcome of, or I should say, owns the process. Because Jane-Scott's talking about the ecosystem, making sure all the functions are aligned in order to move towards that visionary outcome. At times, we as leaders need to give up the outcome and be committed to the process to get there. And that's also what Jane Scott is promoting. But we never want to give up the vision of that horizon beyond the horizon. So everybody sees the higher purpose and the direction that we're headed.
Yeah. Group reinforcement makes shared blind spots extremely difficult to detect, right? One person's unchallenged assumption strengthens another person's certainty. The high functioning leadership collectives assume they have blind spots, right? They're on alert for it.
Good.
And that
Oh,
assumption actually strengthens the coherence because it keeps the system curious, reflective, and adaptive. They
great point.
intentionally interrogate their assumptions, their decisions, their patterns, their processes, their leadership signals. And they actively seek outside perspective, right? So,
Right,
again, just
right.
like the individual can't see their own blind spot, that's why it's named a blind spot, a collective can't see its collective blind spot. And so they are seeking input and feedback from customers and from suppliers and from their workforce and from their board and right. And they seek that outside perspective before fragmentation becomes normalized.
I got a couple of follow-on questions with this. So, because when you're talking about this, there's obviously a business element to what you're talking about, but there's a personal side to it also, because you're talking about people who, are not self-aware and these things. Do you get pushback from leaders in teams because you are getting into some personal habits and traits ever? Mark, maybe you start. What do you think?
I will. And note, I did a little side trip. Here's the Mark Twain quote. It
Mhm.
ain't what you don't know. It just blank. Bear with me. It ain't what you don't know that gets you into trouble. It's what you know for sure that just ain't so.
I love it. I love it.
Okay.
I
I
love
knew
it.
I paraphrased and I somewhat killed it, but it ain't what you don't know that gets you into trouble. It's what you know for sure that just ain't so. Blind spot, blind
Yeah.
spot. And at the Pacific Institute, we built a legacy. We were market makers 50 plus years ago, beginning all of our exercises with uncovering blind spots because it creates this awareness in leaders. And leaders now appreciate, Paul, the fact that the soft skills are the hard ones to master. And so with this multi-generational workforce, they're embracing this whole notion about, what might I be missing? Because in our blind spots, and here is the drop the mic moment for our teaching, in our blind spots lie our limiting beliefs. And if we're blind to them and we don't look to a coach like Jane-Scott or a collective like a peer group that she leads, then you're going to be stuck in that echo chamber. And so you need to begin with, okay, what might I be missing? What's keeping me up at night that when I get out of bed in the morning, I just don't have a solution for? I think I have all the answers and people aren't following me when I look over my shoulder. So
Yeah.
what is that? What's that thought what's a belief tied to that thought that if I change, it's going to change my outcome? And
Yeah.
importantly, what does it look like when it's fixed? Limiting to liberating beliefs. That's what creates this awareness moment. And leaders today with this multi-generational workforce, leaders today appreciate the fact that they've got to be self-aware, not in an echo chamber, building that collective, building that guiding coalition, because people are embracing this whole notion of organizational culture like never before. If my
Yeah.
father, God rest his soul, knew I was teaching these things, he would dog me, post-depression mindset. It's just, hey, Panciera, what the heck? Just cover payroll on Friday, guy. Just go get her
Right.
done, right? No,
Yeah.
no,
Yeah.
wait a second. We got to bring the best out in people and build that collective, because the collective, it's what's going to drive not only organizational performance, but create a unique value proposition in the marketplace, separating your company from all others. Jane-Scott?
Yeah. Well said. Yeah. Jane Scott, how do you feel about that? The personal, the business side.
They run parallel, right? I think what you're asking is, and it's something I ask my clients all the time. They'll set out these big plans, they have these strategies, they have all of this coordination going on. And I always ask them, who do you need to be as a leader in order to be successful? Who
Food.
do you
That's a
need
great.
to
Yeah. That's great.
be?
Yeah.
Not what do you need to do? Who do you need to be as a leader?
That's a great
And I
question.
think that question is holds true for the leadership collective. And anyone within that collective can ask that question. Who do we need to be? How do we need to be experienced as a leadership collective in order for us to elevate the performance of our organization, of our team, of our right
Mm,
to meet the goals that we have
mm.
laid out. And it's not just always quantitative goals; it's qualitative goals, right? It is who do we want to be as an organization, and how does this leadership collective? What does this leadership collective need to be in order to take our organization to that level. Right?
So if I may trade on that, I'm sorry, Jane Scott.
Go ahead, actually.
To trade on that because it's a perfect segue, Paul. At the Pacific Institute, we've got a process, somewhat of a paradigm that we know to be true, and that is our battle cry of me, we, us, me, we, us, and it's fashioned after our logo, which is a flame, and that is all meaningful, lasting change starts from within me first. When we fly, what did the flight attendants say to do with the oxygen mask first? Put it on ourselves
Right.
in order
Yeah.
to help others. So it's me onto we, the team, and onto us, the collective, us, the organization, if you will. Okay. Me, we, us, it could be communities as well. But going back to your point, Paul, it's about the individual, and leaders are more, no matter at what stage they are in on their leadership journey, they are very self-aware and desirous of personal development as a leader in order to drive greater leadership impact on others, on the collective, in order to illuminate the potential of the collective so it becomes that organizational culture. So it's somewhat of a self-managing, self-leading organization. Jane
Yeah.
Scott, makes sense?
It does. In leadership teams, performance depends less on isolated action and more on coordinated action under pressure, right? A team
Mm,
does not become high performing simply because individuals are talented. They need to be
Mm-hmm.
competent. They need to be developing themselves as leaders, right? And really, when you move from in leadership circle terminology from a reactive leader towards a creative leader, right? You're moving from the doing to the being, right? It's a true transformation. So individual leaders have that responsibility and obligation to their collective and to the organization. But the team doesn't become high performing simply because individuals are talented. It's high performing when leaders consistently reinforce one another's decisions, priorities, and intent across the organization. This is when the goals, the objectives, the processes become shared. They're not just common, right? You can have a common vision. Yeah, we're both kind of going to the same North Star. When it becomes shared, you're really
mm,
looking at what I call that collective leadership, where the being of the leadership is what will elevate the organization into consistent performance, which is what
mm,
makes high performing organizations. One offs is not, high performing, it's the consistency of it. Um, yeah, the transition from individual leadership to collective leadership, it's two paths. It's the individual, but it's also when they come together as a group, how are they developing from the doing and the synchronization into the being or the coherence of a collective.
it's
Fascinating stuff.
It's hard
it,
work. Trust me, it's hard
without
work.
question, and it's
Yeah.
consistent and repeatable,
Yeah.
replicable, vitally
Yeah.
important, and that drives organizational enterprise value. So
Yeah.
then, and
Yeah.
then everybody's served. Well
Yeah.
said, Jane Scott.
Yeah.
Paul, back to
Yeah.
you.
Well, I love this one because so I'm not a New York Knicks fan, but what I'm amazed at is under pressure how Jalen Brunson, their star point guard, is performing.
Oh,
Insane, setting records. Whole nation's
oh,
focused on that guy and what he's doing. It's a great story. And this gets into the question of what happens to mindset and to alignment under pressure. What tends to hold and what tends to break? I don't think there's a better analogy than the NBA playoffs right now, but you go. Jane Scott, what do you think?
yeah.
So I went to Duke. So we
Oh,
certainly understand performance under pressure.
oh
And
yeah.
Coach K, he's got a wonderful series on Masterclass that really talks about, he took his team to that collective level, and he did
Hmm.
that on a
Absolutely.
continuous basis.
Hmm.
There was genuine love between the players, right? Pressure is one of the clearest diagnostic tools in organizational life, if you will,
Hmm.
right? So, under normal conditions, organizations can appear aligned or more aligned sometimes than they actually are. But pressure really exposes the hidden fragmentation very quickly. Different assumptions, conflicting priorities, weak trust, unclear
Hmm.
accountability, all of it becomes visible, right? It's not saying that highly coherent leadership collectives do not become perfect under pressure. Duke did not get the championship this year, by the way. The ACC, yes. The NCAA, no. But they remain directionally aligned, adaptive, mutually reinforcing, even as the conditions intensify. And to me,
Mm.
that's where you see a true collective coherence under pressure.
Yeah. And this relates to whether it's high performing athletes or military warriors
Mhm.
or family, heads of households, growing families. Um, we all can face that amygdala hijack. It's a bit of a wonky term, but that fight, flight, or freeze, that when we are under pressure, we stop intentionally thinking. We stop our discernment. And
Mhm.
when that
Hmm.
happens, we end up with blind spots, and we end up in a subconscious incompetence because, Paul, we end up going back to our emotional history and habitualizing something that might not serve us any longer as a leader under high pressure situations. But when you appreciate the fact that limiting beliefs are going to they're going to show themselves. They're going to out themselves under pressure. We go back to how we used to do things. That's the way we've always done it. Duck and cover. Well, we become more intentional about those liberating beliefs. Transformation, Jane-Scott mentioned that, but a transcendence. We're better than that. We don't we can perform we can be high performers no matter how the environment, the external environment, these
Yeah.
externalities are impacting us. We're better than that. And so we end up, based on those liberating beliefs, habitualizing behavior very much like a high performing athlete. I mean, I go back to
Right.
Michael Jordan practicing foul shots in his airplane seat thousands and thousands of times again, because our brain doesn't know the difference between something vividly imagined, the actual experience. So when he
Yeah.
gets on the court and everybody's heckling him to miss the foul shot, it's all net every time because he's already done it in his brain. He's habitualized it. And then we just bring that into being, if you will. So you're habitualizing the behavior that you want, with pressure or without, and you have an attitude about, wait a second, that I am enough, I can do this. And you have an expectancy of high performance. You have an expectancy that it's going to come true, and that you are going to manifest the very performance that you have practiced in your mind's eye,
Yeah.
habitually in advance of that pressure filled situation. So no matter our walk in life, we can do this. We've got the mental technology, we've got the superpower within us. We just have to be very intentional about practicing for those moments.
I think Mark makes a really good point, and it really parallels nicely between the leadership development and the leadership collective development, right? Because they're on the same paths. When he's talking about the hijacking of the amygdala, in my parlance, we'd call that, being triggered back into your reactive tendencies.
Yeah,
And I
Hmm.
have a
yeah,
Hmm.
success story that got me here. And oh,
yeah.
by the way, to transform between a reactive leader into a creative leader, right? To
Mm-hmm.
go from the doing to the being, you have to grow through it. You have to work through it. You
Mm-hmm.
can't just hop up to a
Good,
level 5 leader in Jim
good.
Collins' parlance from without being a level 3 leader first, right? So
Yeah,
that's why it's called development. That's why it's called a journey. It's hard work.
yeah, good.
And leadership collectives go through that same development or maturing process to get to that level. Instead of flipping back into the reactive under pressure, this is, if you're a controlling reactive, if a reactive tendency is controlling, it's like my way. We're going to get through this. Don't worry. Just follow me. Right.
Mm-hmm.
The leadership collective can actually fall back into that. Hey, I have distributed responsibility and ownership for the performance of the organization, but all of a sudden we just hit this pressure point. Don't worry, let us swoop in and we will get you guys, to the other side, right? That's a leadership collective experienced as controlling, right? My way, strength of will. You can also
Distributed leadership. You said it. It's
Yeah.
very good. Yeah.
exactly, exactly. There's other reactive tendencies. There's the protecting. This is the strength of mind. I can intellectualize myself, but I also dissociate emotionally from what's occurring, right? I call it the Dr. Spock move. You dissociate and you become highly analytical. Okay, great. But that actually doesn't provide the compassion or the understanding that you want to be experienced as a leader or as a leadership collective. And then the last and the most corrosive is complying, right? I need to be
Mm.
everybody's friend. I don't want to hurt your feelings. I can't have the courageous conversations because I don't want to get voted off the island. We all need to belong, right? I do believe in belonging, but part of belonging means accepting one another for who they are. It's not everybody is in agreement. As a matter of fact, the most high performing teams do not agree a lot of the time, but they do come to agreement or alignment on the direction of where we're going, right?
Yeah, yeah. See, I would imagine the friction of the teams not agreeing helps to get to the resolution, right?
Yeah,
Because they're in solve
absolutely.
mode.
Yeah. Well, you're in solve mode. So and the friction is great in terms of innovation. The friction is
Yeah, yeah.
great in terms of growth. No growth occurs in comfort, right?
Yeah.
So you have to have that challenge, but underlying it, like Lencioni says, underlying it really is trust. And that trust is regenerative. The more you are working on yourself in terms of your leadership development arc, as well as recognizing that the goal of the leadership collective is to move beyond just synchronized activities into shared activities, a coherence. Yeah.
Good.
Yeah, I gotta say that
Um,
both of you should get together and write a book of sayings, just one line sayings, because I'm like, there's been about 1,000 on here. I'm like, oh, that's great, that's great, that's great. My, you could go to new heights with that book. Well, and this is fascinating to me because, well, the pressure thing is fascinating because I just, see people tend to either rise to the occasion under pressure or wilt, and most wilt, and they get frantic and nervous, all the things you're citing here. And I just see true incredible leaders that they just get calm. There's like a sense of calmness that comes over them
Presence,
when
right?
shit's going on,
Yeah.
excuse me, around them,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
they function at a high level. I'm always amazed by that. And this gets
Presence.
me into something here is is if as a CEO believes in this work and uh, how do they scale this where, throughout the organization? And this gets into a question I had about processes. Is there something you're implementing, a process to scale it? Because it's not a one and done thing, right? So how do you make
Hmm.
sure that it's scaled and there forever?
Hmm.
Yeah. I believe it scales when leadership capability becomes distributed rather than centralized, right? The goal is
Hmm.
not for every important decision to flow back to the CEO. The goal is for leaders throughout the organization to have this shared understanding of strategic intent, decision principles, enterprise priorities, and how success is evaluated. Again, this is more than just common understanding, it is a shared understanding. And when that happens, the leaders can make high quality decisions without excessive escalation. Coherence exists beyond personality or hierarchy, if you will.
Hmm.
That's when collective leadership, I believe, becomes an organizational capability rather than an executive dependency.
Hmm. And trading on that and answering your question, absolutely, there's a process. Um, Jane-Scott creates a skill set out of mindset. And I'm the first step in that. The awareness moment at a leadership level to have that leader appreciate the fact that they have limiting beliefs and we help them identify what their limiting belief is, then shift to a liberating one. What do you want it to look like fixed? And then using a Panciera version of the SMART goal setting model, specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time bound. The Panciera version is SMIT. I try to make it easier. It's like, what specifically are you going to do to achieve that liberating belief? How
Yep.
are you going to measure it? How are you going to measure it? What does success look like when you get there? When are you going to do it by? In short bursts, 30, 60, 90 max. And then celebration. How are you going to celebrate? So it's awareness, acceptance, action, and achievement. And that then gets repeated at the Jane-Scott level because it becomes systemic within the organization. It happens at each level, and that each level, there's a guiding coalition to make sure that they are facilitating in a model, mentor, monitor way. They're gonna model the very beliefs and behaviors that they want out of their folks. They're going to mentor them up to into higher levels of achievement for themselves, and then they're going to monitor them, hold them accountable to make sure they're achieving. And then it just wash, rinse, repeat at all levels of the organization. Me, we, us, going back to the paradigm or the construct that I shared. But it's what Jane-Scott said. It becomes systemic. It becomes a collective of leaders. There's a collective coherence. There's a collective alignment. There's a collective, everybody's rowing in the same direction
Right.
because
Yeah.
they own it and they want it. And
Yeah.
gratitude, they're grateful for the opportunity, and that fuels, it's gratitude's the unyielding fuel for courage to continue going despite the pressure.
Yeah.
I love it.
Collective leadership development is very similar to individual leadership development, but you're doing it recognizing that you're working with the collective, meaning you take a baseline. If you're looking for the nits and gnats of how we do this, is we give them a baseline. How are you experienced? How do you believe you are experienced as a collective? How do you want to be? So you've got an as is and a to be, and then you've got a gap. Okay, let's figure out actually how we move from the as is to the to be, right? And that is done in conjunction with individual leadership development. The terminology is the same, right? Moving from a reactive to a creative, to use leadership circle, which is what we use to do this, and recognizing that moving from that common understanding to the shared understanding, it's a different tilt, really. It's a different
Yeah.
level of investing in where we're going as a shared vision, where we're going as a shared experience. How do we want to be as a collective? And who do I need to be as an individual as part of that collective that helps? But then also, when we come together and the dynamic takes over of the collective in action, how are we maintaining who we need to be as creative leaders in order to ensure that the collective itself is experienced as a creative collective? So,
That's it.
yeah.
Yeah, all such good stuff. So, all right, as we hit a wall here, I want to ask you one parting question, and both of you can address is for a leadership team that's seeing this, listening, what's the first shift they should make individually and collectively to improve performance? And we'll sign off with that. If Jane Scott, maybe you can start.
Actually, I'll let Mark go first with
Okay,
the
Mark.
individual, and then I'll come behind with the collective because it starts with the individual, right?
Correct. Yeah. Journey of 1,000 miles first starts with the first step. And it's that leader saying, I got there's more. Law of the lid, John Maxwell. I don't have any glass ceiling on me. How can I illuminate? Because that's the responsibility of us as leaders, Paul. We've got to be hope navigators. We've got to be, potential guides on the side, illuminating the potential of others. But it starts with the individual. And that individual just has to be real with themselves. What might I be missing? And how can I help others illuminate their potential to drive greater personal, professional performance than ever before? So it starts with the individual leader, with self-introspection, saying, man, it's beyond good to great. It's absolutely great to greater. And I want to be a catalyst for that change.
Mhm. Yeah.
Love it. Jane Scott.
From the collective coherence standpoint or the collective leadership standpoint, most leadership teams don't need dramatically better people, right? What they often need is greater coherence in how they operate together. So the first shift is moving from individual optimization, has to be done, right? You need to actually focus. If you don't have a culture of leadership development, your collective is really not going to take traction, right? But move from individual optimization to collective responsibility, right? Ownership. The second is developing the discipline to consistently align towards shared understanding of priorities, decisions, communication, accountability, and trust across the leadership collective, right? It really is recognizing what is your leadership team rewarding in the organization, right? And yeah, I think actually it starts with the individual, then it moves into, you could ask a very simple audit of your leadership signals for coherence. One question, if you will, what are the organization's top three? And I would ask this simple question individually, everybody within your leadership team. What are your organization's top 3 priorities right now, and what behaviors are most rewarded here?
Mm,
Then compare your answers, right? Right
Yeah.
mhm.
there, you now have diagnosed whether or not you're fragmented inside your leadership collective, and or whether you actually have that shared understanding of what your organization is all about and where it's going.
Mhm. Amen.
Thought-provoking. Yeah, thought-provoking. Listen, I want to say thank you to both of you for being here. For those of you watching, wherever you're watching this, because we simulcast this everywhere on LinkedIn, YouTube, Facebook, it goes out everywhere. The contact information for Jane, Scott, and Mark will be around this video. Maybe it's up here or down here. Get connected to them. Great people. Thank you both for being here. I know we're going to continue this discussion. Love it.
Thank you, Paul.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Paul.
Jane-Scott.
Appreciate the
Okay.
opportunity.
Yep. We'll see you
Likewise.
soon.